Okay, good. Welcome to your first section in this class. And basically, I just started out with showing you what your screen should look like whenever you go to the course page. And today we're going to do something that is going to be relatively repetitive at the end, by the end of the term, but it's very useful now, which is essentially downloading your R data file from the homework assignments, downloading your script or your syntax, your R code, putting those into one folder, which is what my preference, because then you have all of your project analyses in one location, and then running the syntax and understanding what it means. So this involves, of course, going through the modules, but also, just running through the syntax and reading the Student's Guide to R book. Of course, I'm also available at any time. I have a cell phone. I have WhatsApp. I also have a personal Zoom account, and I will give that information, and you will see that later tonight under section and office hours schedule. I will post there my personal Zoom information. That's different than the Zoom that we have here, which is being recorded with me one-on-one. You can talk to me concurrently. You can talk to me at any other time. This section, I'll try to record as many sections as I can, but this section definitely we're going to record, and it'll be posted under section videos. So if you want to rewatch it or watch it later, because I know we're going to go pretty quickly. You'll see there isn't anything yet, but we'll post those as we go along. But I do that. I have two sections a week. One that is being recorded, just so for the unrecorded section, if you want to meet and you want less structure, or you really want to ask questions and you might feel a little shy, that's a better opportunity. Otherwise, I would also say, if you want to right now, you may also ask questions. Check up on the R tutorials page. I have a lot of tutorials yet to be posted. These are more structured. They are in YouTube, which means you can play them twice as fast. Now, before we even do what we're going to do today, which is download R, the software, download the R data sets and analyze it. Look at this web page. You follow this, you follow the PDF, you'll get everything you need. That doesn't mean that there are still questions. If you have questions, talk to me one-on-one. So we have a homework assignment due this Thursday, and of course that requires us to do data analysis. So what do? Well, first thing we got to do is we want to go to our little modules page. We were there before. There are other, because it's a website with many different kinds of interfaces. There are other ways to sort of view this, and you actually might see some little modules here that you wouldn't see elsewhere. But I want us to go to, well, actually, if we go to assignments, that'll be easier. Does anyone have any questions, by the way, as I'm navigating the web page? You'll see that some of these are the green ones are the ones that you should see. So here we have the assignments. Now, shoot, these are labeled a little bit differently. Hold on, sorry. Yeah, so this is actually what we want to do is we want to not go to the quizzes, which are ungraded. We want to go to the problem sets, and it's for week 2 module, and it's due at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, by the way. So, because I'm an instructor, this will look like a preview. But the next page I'm going to show you will look exactly like how you have it right here. Right? So here we have different questions, key statistical concepts, things like that. The word of the week is cliometrics, the study of history. I think it's an interesting term. And you're analyzing a very famous, exciting data set. This is the Titanic data set. It was actually published in several articles. I want to say the analyses were first published in the journal Science. Don't quote me on that one. But the output you see here, like say, look at this question here under question 4, you'll see that that's the output that we're going to see that you will see in the RStudio interface. So I want to get us straight to downloading the data set. And that's right under part 2, R data analysis in R. and the accompanying R code. Everything that we're going to show you for the course and everything that is expected for the course involves basically downloading a data set which always has a suffix capital R, capital D, lowercase ATA. That's an R data file. It means that it's like a data set that you might see elsewhere with the proviso that you can only open this in R. Now, I have other more advanced R tutorials that I'll show, especially for advanced students or for your final project. If you want to, for those of you who want to load or analyze data that are not specifically for R, which is probably most data. Nevertheless, that's not really our goal. Our goal is to teach you the concepts and to get you started on doing the fun stuff of stats, which is analyzing cool data sets and making new discoveries, which is, really the most exciting part. The R code is another kind of R file. It's if you look at the R universe, they all have particular suffixes. I see there's a question here. So thank you for notifying me. Let me see if I can get that up. Yeah, sure. So someone had asked, briefly about the concepts of what variables, factors, and levels are. So, yeah, this is the theme for this week. And I'll show this to you, by the way, when we go through the R syntax. So thank you for asking that. Now, that being said, we do have about 45 minutes. I could talk for 2 hours on this. So I'm going to try to be quite, how do I put it? Quite brisk with this. I'm not going to go through all of the code in detail, but feel free to continue to probe me for areas of emphasis. My main goal is just to make sure that you have on a folder on your home page, like right here. I'm going to minimize our screen. I want us to have on our home page right here, on our desktop. We're going to have a folder. We're going to open it, and we're going to call this we're going to say pset1. That's simple enough. And then you're going to have a folder here that you can open up, and it's empty, of course. And what we want to have, and this is the way I would structure every assignment when going forward, and you can organize these folders elsewhere, is you have a folder, and we're going to put an R data file, the data set, and we're going to include the script or the code. I like it because it keeps everything together. You're not fishing around for a data set. You don't have multiple copies. It doesn't get confusing. It's often referred to as data hygiene, I've heard. It's also called workflow. It's a way of kind of automating and keeping track of your analyses as you go along, especially when things become more complex. So the first thing I did, of course, what I do, I created a folder for our analysis, and this is for part 2. All right, so now we scroll and we can see these blue links that are highlighted here for our convenience. So I'm going to open a new tab. I can insert it. I can, let's see if we can save the link as something. Let's see if we can actually save it to the desktop. Oh, this is great. So I'm going to just simplify things. I'm going to save this to the desktop. Notice they call it an R workspace, but notice here's the label. It's Titanic. We'll save it to our desktop, and we should see on our desktop. Oh, that's interesting. Huh, okay. Let's not do that. I apologize, because it's saved as something that looks like an Excel sheet. And our workspace is something different. It's beyond the scope of the course. It's more of like a, you know how you play a video game and you save, let's say, where you are in the video game? But what we really have is an R data file. And you can see that right here, because if you look at what I highlighted, the title is Titanic.rdata. Now while we're at it, I just want to emphasize this. R is case sensitive. So if you think you can't find the Titanic data set, or you have a problem doing your analysis, keep in mind that capitalization matters. So here we have a capital T for Titanic. It's also why I emphasize the suffix here. R data, R and D are capitalized. So let's just, I'm on a Windows 7 machine. It's relatively similar for a Mac. Just double click this little guy, and we just saw it download. And let me show you right here. Yep, there it is. Well, interestingly enough, even though they call it an R workspace, they still call it an R data file. It just looks different. Well, that's fine. I'm going to show this in the folder. You'll see I have a bunch of other bunch of other stuff I've dropped in my downloads folder. But let's just put this here. Okay, well that's interesting. I'm not sure why the image of this looks like an Excel file. Who knows? We'll see what goes on here. But we'll put it in our file. We shouldn't have a problem once we open it with R. What probably is happening is sometimes when you first use a software, which of course I haven't, it might be recognized as something else. I'm actually going to open RStudio at the same time. But before we do that, I'm sorry, I'm going ahead of myself. So the next thing we do is we download our data set. Let's download the R code. And here we see it, that should be in our download folder as well. And there's pset R code. And that has also the suffix R. So RStudio is constantly updating. You'll see this little message here. You can ignore the update. You should be fine on the relatively most current version of it. Perhaps I may be incorrect about that, but oh look, I'm sorry. Here's the R Titanic data set that I wanted. I'm sorry. And let's download this by date modified. Yeah, whatever. Look, it doesn't matter in terms of the names. I'm sorry if this seems a little I don't know, fly by the seat of my pants, but this is the way data analysis goes, by the way. Data analysis is a messy business. As my advisor would say, even though when you look at a published piece of work in a scientific journal, it really takes a lot of dirty work, a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty in the process. We're trying to be more transparent about that, of course, because science is a human enterprise. I want to show this to you before I put this script file here. Just if you see my cursor here, you loom over it. You'll see the size. You'll see that it is an R file. That means it's a script. So the script is basically this is the recipe. This tells you what to do, and the data set is basically the meat. These are the ingredients. This is what you do. I mean, this is what you use. So all we're doing is we're putting the R file, the script, or the recipe, the instructions, in the same folder as the R data file, which is the information. But you should also see that this is a little more reassuring. Once I opened RStudio, it looks like that the icon for the script actually reflects what it should be recognized as by my operating system, which is it's an R file with a very particular suffix. So let's open up our little folder here. Well, we know this is recognized as an R data file. It's a little bit larger than our scripts, and here's the code. So and I did open up RStudio here, and you'll see a bunch of stuff here, because guess what? I'm a regular user of R. So one of the exciting things about this class, right, is I'm going to clear my workspace. I'm going to actually restart R. Is that I'm not only just an instructor, I'm also a regular user of R. I produce knowledge using this syntax. Let's clear the workspace, because I want it to look like basically I think how it would for you. So let's see, clear workspace. Yep, we're going to clear the workspace, because I want to show what R probably looks like when you open it, with the proviso, the caveat that it looks a little different depending on where you're at or what operating system you use. I've noticed sometimes the window panes are a little bit different. We're going to even open an empty script here just so you can see that. But this is sort of what R looks like, and I can talk a little bit more about that. But basically, you have R where you have, well, interestingly enough, as R updates and changes, the whole environment actually changes. And here's a new term for you if you're new to R, which is basically the environment. When we talk about the environment, we're talking about everything that you have in R, all the data sets, all the scripts, everything you're doing, where you're doing it, that's kind of a general concept for environments. It's more common in computer programming. You may not have heard it in other realms. But try to get familiar with this and what the RStudio environment looks like. This is different than what is called base R. And base R is, some people like it, but it was the original kind of, it's really the origin of R. What this is it's called a wrapper, really, in software speak. And a wrapper is what you would imagine it to be. If you buy a candy bar, the candy bar is the chocolate. Well, the wrapper makes it look nice. And here the wrapper isn't just to make it look nice. It's also to make it usable. There are a lot of drop-down menus. There's a lot of ways for help. But this is what it sort of looks like. You have these you should have one window. Your script is most often in the upper left-hand corner. I just open an empty script. This is called your console. You can see it right here. You can even see where its location. In very faint print, it's right on the desktop. Here are a bunch of other kind of panes, mostly like the help pane would be useful for you. Something called packages, right? Because remember, we installed the Mosaic package to do our analyses. And then files that we have. And these are files that I have. It looks like right on my desktop. So let's see if we can navigate here. Did we just navigate? Nope, we didn't navigate. That's fine. So we want to actually change our working directory, but we'll focus on that later. What I want to do is simply just show you what RStudio looks like. Don't worry about understanding everything. It's like test driving a new car and trying to figure out what every little bell and whistle does. There are still things that surprise me sometimes, like keyboard shortcuts, for instance, that I know have also surprised experts and developers of R, people who write the code. You'll notice that R is also amenable to, how would I put it, personalization. You see that the lettering right here in the console is a little bit larger than you would probably expect. Well, I did that in part for pedagogical reasons. I just wanted you to be able to see what's going on here. It might be a little bit too large. So I think you can go to Tools, and you can go to something called Global Options. And this is useful anyway. If you want to change what R looks like, or you don't like the way it looks, you should be able to go there. Well, it's taking a while to do that. And we'll talk about that later, because I don't want us to run out of time. But if we go to Code and we go to Display, can we change the script size? If I don't see that right now, I'm not going to deal with it. Appearance. Oh yeah, there it is. I want to change the font to maybe 12. Apply. Yeah, that's much better. Okay. There are a lot of different things we can do too, but right now I'm going to have us open our data files, and we're going to do it through a drop-down menu. So don't worry about coding. I can show you other ways, but I'm going to we're going to open a file, and you look at this. It's pretty easy. It's like opening a Windows file. What do we want to do? Well, first of all, we opened, I'm going to actually start from the get-go, because remember, this will be the first time. Yeah, we'll save this. Why not? What I want to show you is how to start, which is you could have R pinned to your dock on a Mac, or you could actually have it as an icon on your desktop. But basically what you do when you get started is you download your material, you single click R here, and it'll take a while, it'll load. And then we want to do two things. We want to get our data in. So this is what R should look like. It has a bunch of script here to tell you what version it is. It has a funny name here. It also tells you where the location is. It says it's telling us we're on the desktop. There's something called an R data a suffix here. That is your workspace. It basically remembers what's going on here. I'm going to clear the environment here. It's a long story, but basically you should essentially see an empty spaces all around. I like to stay on the help menu just as a reminder to you that you can get help whenever you need it. So let's go to the drop-down menu. What are we going to do? Well, we're going to open a file. What are we going to open? Well, something on our desktop. Oh, well, here we have PSET1. We just opened that. Here we have the Titanic data set. It doesn't look like it's an R data file, but let's try this. And then it gives you a question. It wants to confirm, do you want to load the R data file? It gives you the path file into the global environment. Remember I said environments? Global environment just means everything where you're working. It means that a global environment also means that, like a video game, remember how I said how things save once you do them? Well, that's what happens here. Well, look what we have. We just loaded our data set here. Well, how else do we know? By the way, how do I know this? Because in the console, it printed this. But most importantly, if you want to know what's in your environment, let's open up, let's keep tabs on this little window right here, which is, here you have a new file, a new section called data, and here we have the Titanic data sets. Look at all the information there. What I erased before, which you probably won't see, is sometimes because of a package I installed earlier, basically a software component I installed, you might see the last, what do you want to say, data set or function or command that I have in my global environment. But you should see in your environments your data set, and there it is. Well, voila, we got the data in. This is great news for us. Well, now let's get to the second part, right? Let's get this script in. So I just click it here once, and I open it. I think you can even double click, but I'm being a little circumspect here. Look at this, we got the script here. So this is what the environment looks like. This should be your goal, essentially. Once you're here, the script is actually relatively straightforward. We did not make anything too complex for you. What I just walked you through was your primary objective, and what I believe to be the most frustrating part of actually getting started with statistics, and I guess with applied data analysis, which is basically getting your software installed and ready to go, getting your data in, and then getting your script or your code in. After that, it should be pretty easy. And I imagine there are going to be questions here. And to that end, as I said before, I actually have a very short 3-minute tutorial that I'm going to post that shows you how to load the R data file again, just so if you want to see that one little component. Otherwise, I would encourage you to rewatch the tutorial on loading your installing R and some of the jargon involved there. And of course, we're going to cover this more in detail tomorrow. I'm going to talk about what these panes are, what are some other components, what are other ways to load data in. But we're also going to revisit this theme again and again and again, which is download the data, download the scripts, right? I'll use the term script here. And if I'm talking too fast or using some jargon, it's simply because when you use a software program, there is kind of this idiosyncratic language. It just makes it easier. But I try to slow down. So if you have any questions about some of the new words that I use, or the old words that I use somewhat differently, please let me know. I try to be aware of that. Because in R, this is not really a data set, it's a data frame. Okay, so we have some questions in the homework assignment in R, and most of these are worded here. What I want to show to you is our two other steps. I was pretty optimistic, saying that if you got to this view, if you got your panes where you see the script here, so this is where you can even type in commands. You have the console here where you can type things in on your own. You have the script here, which is basically you can just highlight some code and let it run, and you have the data set that correctly applies to that. If you don't have those, I just showed you something. One nice thing about RStudio is if you're used to Excel, you can actually click on, I did this by accident, but I'll show it to you now. We're about halfway through, we have 30 minutes. You can actually see the data set. And you can do that by seeing this little blue radial button here that's an arrow to the right. You can push it down. You can also see these variables here in this way. So here you have the variable name, you have a colon, and then you have what we call factor variables. Remember that. And one of the questions that arose today was what are variables, and what are factors, and what are levels of the factor? Well, this is a nice occasion to talk about that. So actually, before we go to the script, I'll talk a little bit about this data set. Or what I want you to say now, especially if you want to communicate immediately to your peers or to people in the know that you are a savvy data scientist, call these data frames. These aren't data sets necessarily, these are data frames. Why do we call that in R? Well, because it's kind of like a, I don't know, how would I put it? It's like a spreadsheet. So there are many different ways of structuring data, but a data frame is a useful way of thinking about a particular kind of data set. Well, and we know what this looks like. It's a typical spreadsheet. Here you have columns. So here you have right here, little words here. And then you have rows here. And the cool thing is, every little cell here, pretend this is Excel, every one of these cells has something meaningful in it. That's what a data frame is. And that's also what is often called a tidy data set. We want our data sets to be meaningful all the way through. If there's missing data, for instance, it's informative to be told that we have missing data. So, for example, on on row 2, if this name were missing, as long as we had some indicator that this were missing, like some value or some label there, then we still have a pretty quote-unquote tidy data set. We have something where we at least know we don't know anything there. So let's go to the question of what are variables in a data frame? Variables, most often, not always, but I'm gonna actually say almost always, and always in this class, if you have questions, a variable in a data frame are these things right here. These are the columns. A variable is a column in a data frame. Rows, as you see here, they're numbered sequentially. Those are observations. More abstractly, a variable describes an attribute of the data set. And more concretely, the rows are observations. But let's take this to the Titanic. Everyone knows about the Titanic, and if you haven't, watch the movie, and then you'll really see, that this is I think, the best, a nice introductory example of understanding what data frames are or data sets and what variables are. Because here, the rows themselves, you see these numbers right here? Those are actually not in the data set. Those are actually just for our convenience. This is a nice thing about the wrapper. And it basically tells us, that it could be in any arbitrary order, but it basically tells us, well, what row are we looking at? And the variables themselves, so what are the rows here? Well, these are passengers. They're people. And in fact, every single number here is a person. So let's take a look at that first person. Well, the first person, by the way, not the first person in any meaningful sense, except that we just use this we use the numbers on the rows just as a marker, just to keep track of things. We could rearrange things so, this male at number 10 were the first observation. The main point is that we just want to make sure everything's organized. So the ordering doesn't matter here because it's not part of the data set. The data set consists of just a roster of people. Okay, well, what do we know? Well, we know that if we look at this one passenger, we know that she's female. She's 29. Her name is Miss Elizabeth Walton Allen. This takes a little bit of intuition, but you can sort of see that there's a last name followed by the first name, and that's separated by a comma. And then you see how much they paid. And then you see the social class they're in, and then you see whether or not they survived. Well, fortunately, Miss Allen survived. So this is a very good way to get introduced to the data set itself. Okay. If you notice, when I hover over these columns, we get to our terms here. So here we have column 1. Now, this is not a labeled column, but we know it's column 1 because it's the first one that we see. But the variable itself has a particular name. That's why we're not using numbers there, because that's a name. That's an actual, that's the variable. And it's called a factor variable with 2 levels. Well, a factor variable is just another way of saying a categorical variable. And levels here refers to how many different categories are there. So let's translate the jargon here. If we highlight this, column 1, the first row on our data set is a variable, is a categorical variable with 2 values. It only takes on 2 values. But what is gender? Male or female? So how many levels are there in gender? 2. Why is it a factor variable? Because it's categorical, because there are not any, there's no number assignment to that. Okay. And by the way, this is what I like about RStudio, and it can be kind of vexing or confusing at first. Notice I briefly alluded to this notion of factor variables when I was over here, because if you also look at this interface, which is a little more standard, it's less like an Excel sheet, you can see the name of the variable, gender. You can see a colon, which basically says, okay, here we have the variable gender. Well, what is it? I'll tell you. It's a factor variable with 2 levels. And here are the levels, male or female. Now you also see sort of a number here, 1, 2, 1, 2. It doesn't really mean anything. It says the numbers, that, by the way, are for the lower ones. It doesn't really mean anything. That's sort of like a placeholder, because all it does is it means to underscore the fact that we have 2 values, 1 or 2. But really, a factor variable does not have any numbers in it. You cannot. I mean, you can have a percentage, but there's no. It's not something you can trade on the market, because it's not something you can count up, really, and only in the sense that you have this many females and these many males. Does that help explain what a variables, factors, and levels are? Please say yes. Otherwise, I'll continue, and I'll continue a little bit anyway, because I want to show you something else. Not only do we have factor, thank you so much. Not only do we have factor variables, we also have numeric variables. Well, we can see that right here. Age is a number, right? Oh, thank you. Well, I'm trying to highlight this. Well, let's try to highlight fair. We all know what it means to pay for something. Come on. Okay, there we go. Column 4, it's numeric. Look at this. RStudio is quite nice. It has a range from 0 to 512. Oh gosh, you have people paying $0. I'm not exactly sure how that happened. But you also have people paying a lot more. Well, a numeric variable, what is it? Well, it's a number. You can add it up. And let's just take a look at this thing right here. Do you see fair here? Yep. It's truncated as num. And I know there's a lot of information here, which is why we're going to review it tomorrow, and I'll post tutorials. But when I look at this, it doesn't seem that weird. Num is pretty bizarre at first glance. It's not a word. But what does it say? The variable fair is a numeric variable that has some of these values. We're just going to throw you a couple, but it keeps going, just so you get a kind of hint of it. So that's the whole point, just to get kind of like a little snapshot of it. You're not going to get the full data set view, and that's why we have statistics. But so here we have variables. Variables are columns. A data set is a data frame, which is usually a spreadsheet. And but it's very different than a spreadsheet. That's why I'm not going to emphasize it too much. I'm going to close this little tab here, because I'm going to close this here. And I want to show you how I actually got to see that. You can point right here. There's a little box. And that's how you did it. And by the way, this is what I like about R as well. This wasn't always the case with R. Whenever you do something with your hands or with your cursor, it also gives you the syntax here. So if you don't feel like doing this, and I'm a syntax type person, because I like to write things down, because I like to remember what I do, because I always don't remember. Well, look, this is what you have to type. You type capital V, lowercase I, E, W, and in parentheses, you type the name of the data frame or data set. Remember, we have a capital T here. Now, speaking of data sets, And I know we only have 20 minutes left and we haven't even scraped the syntax. We'll probably do that tomorrow, actually. Why don't we talk about that tomorrow? We'll touch it, but I'll record tomorrow's section as well, because I really think this is important to review, just to get an idea of the data set and of these little issues that kind of get people hitched up. Some people were downloading the Titanic data set because there are actually built-in data sets within R. And this is very useful for your final project. And it's also useful just for pedagogical reasons. So unfortunately, or fortunately, because the Titanic data set is so famous, it's actually built within R. But it is a very different data set. It doesn't have all the information. It doesn't have all these rows. It doesn't have, by the way, it doesn't have 1,045 observations. So, oh look, I just accidentally clicked it again. So don't do that. Don't try to download data sets within RStudio. They do that mostly for pedagogical reasons, but also because it's kind of nice to have, actually. You do have an in-house data repository. You know, and when people say build a package or let me put it differently. When people develop a new statistical tool and they want to share it with other people, they'll also often provide a data set they used to illustrate it, and that will be available. I'm sure you can even import a data set through here. I never do that, actually, because I don't think that's useful. But yeah. Hold on for a second. Yeah. Well, oh, by the way, I do have a video on help. We can go to that later. I think you're at the point where if you just follow what I do right now, and this is the best strategy. I'm not saying you can't explore, but if you don't feel comfortable, just try to make sure you can get this up and running first. But there are a lot of ways to explore R. What I don't want you to do is, and I'll do this, I'll do it the wrong way. Actually, let me just try this. Well, yeah, I'll just try this. Titanic, what happens here? Okay, so what I did is I actually printed out the entire data set within the console, or most of it. I think. So you can't often see the full console, but this is because R already knows that I have the data set here. So whenever I write Titanic, it knows what I'm looking for. But I can do something a little funky here. I'm going to erase my environment. And if you ever look at the little broom, that's basically like you're cleaning house. Remember, this is a global environment, so whatever you bring into your global environment, unless you tell it to go away, it's going to stick around. That's also why a lot of programmers don't like global environments, because they can forget that they imported 20 data sets, and they're wondering, why am I analyzing this? I'm a little bit of that school of thought, but I've grown to like the global environment realm, meaning that you can just define what's in it, you can define what's out it, and there are other ways to sort of get around that. But let's clear our global environment, and there we have nothing. This is still open, but basically that's nothing. And then I'm going to clear the console. I just did Control L, by the way. That really doesn't mean anything because there's still a history, but I just want to show to you that if we do things, if we do view Titanic, which is what we tried before, oh, it's still there. Yes. Look what we have here. Here we have the problem. Here we are viewing the built-in data sets. And notice how we know this? We don't see in our global environment the data set because it's already built into the R environments. Also, keep in mind, look, do these variables look the same? Where are the names? Right? We don't have the relevant information. So you don't want to just type in something because this is the problem that you encounter. You don't encounter it if you actually import the data set into your working environment. So this is a mistake that only happens, I think, with the Titanic data set. Most other data sets, they're very different, but this is a very famous one. We have a better data set than what is built in. I think I know why. because it's a lot more information. It's pretty revealing to know how much someone paid, who their name is. You can look these people up historically. You know, it's an issue about in terms of privacy. The other thing you'll notice is you don't really see it here in the global environment, but you can see it in the window here. There aren't that many observations here. This isn't the full data set. So we don't want this built-in data set. So let's get rid of this. And I'm going to, just on the safe side, because there are some things called hidden objects, let's just clear out all of our objects from the workspace. Good. Okay. And I'm actually, so let's go back and get our data set back in. Well, good news is there's a little history tab right next to environment. We go to history. Let's actually try that. What happens if we do? Okay, all you have to do is double click your history there. And all this does is loads from where we were. It fixes our little problem here. And if we click back on environments, here we have our Titanic data set. So I showed you how not to do something to show you how to do something. But I also want to emphasize having built-in data sets, I think is really cool. Now, some major statisticians don't like it. I just saw a blog post about it. I think it's awesome to have this because there are so many cool data sets. So when you talk about your final projects, I'm happy to share that. Okay, we have 10 minutes. We really haven't touched the script. We'll do this tomorrow. But I want you to know that everything here you can run. And if you read the scripts, you will be able to go through it really easily. The thing you have to remember is once you load the script, once you have everything, you want to make sure that you first install the Mosaic package. Now remember, if you watch the tutorial, I showed you how to do this already. So, and you run script by just going like this. Click on this little run button, and it basically you have to be connected to the internet. RStudio is connected to the internet. There's a little scary stuff here, but everything should be okay. And you only have to do that once. All you're saying is, I want the Mosaic package, and it's basically a bunch of different programs that make analysis very easy, and it has a bunch of cool stuff. It's like a grab bag of cool stuff. The other thing I want to show to you is how to comment out something. So once we've done something, let's put the little hashtag here, put a little space. I'm going to do Control S to save my script, and we basically won't run that anymore. So that way you can do this offline. Now on line 11, here's something you always have to do. Whenever you open a new, just because you have a new package or doesn't mean that R knows you want to use it. It's sort of like having a library, having a library. And I think it's an appropriate term to use the word library because this is sort of like checking the book out or taking the book off the shelf. You have lots of packages out there. Well, this time we want to use this one. You almost always want to use this one. So here, you have to run this every single time you do it. And it'll load some other things that are required. Now here we are. And what I'm going to show you in 5 minutes or more or less is basically you can run the script and you can answer these questions just by looking at them. You won't understand all of the details, but we'll do that tomorrow. And I also have a few tutorials to cover these functions. I call these functions because anything that comes before parenthesis in the code that we write, say like bar graph, parenthesis, something, 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 close parenthesis, that's a function. What it is it basically says, we want to make a bar chart. And all this junk here that says, this is how we do it. Tally is a way of making variables of categories, you know, like a two-way contingency table, like one group by another. Those are the two main commands that we have. Here we have tally and we have bar chart. We have counts and we have pi, but that's not as important. But I just want to show you that we should be able to run everything here now once we have the right data set. Why did this open? Well, because we clicked the view here. Names is really good because this gives us the names of the variables. So all I have to do is highlight the scripts. It turns blue. Notice I'm calling that script, the code I call script here. Click run. You get a bar chart here. And where's the bar chart? Well, this is where you got to go to the plots pane, and it opens up right there. So that's important to know. Otherwise, if it's not a chart, like the tally function here, this is not a chart. These are just, it's a tabulation of two categories, which is, in this case, it is a count of class, people belonging to each social class within the Titanic data set. You can run this, and you see it's right in the console. So if it's a figure, you'll see it under the plots pane. And by the way, pane is separated by these little lines here, right? These are all panes. You cannot unpin them. They're all connected. And calculations are within the console. Okay, I'm at a little bit of a crossroads here. I can basically explain a little bit more about the inner workings of these functions, but I want to do that tomorrow. What I'd like to encourage you to do is read the material, go through this yourself, and see if you can answer these questions, because these are actually the problem set questions. So for example, what are the variables in the data set? Well, we did this with names. Voila. Approximately how many people on the Titanic were in the lower class? Well, 500. What about here? Question 3. Now, of course, these are not the same numeric questions that you have in the problem set. They're very similar, if not identical. We're doing this to help you. And I think it's okay to feel, maybe less comfortable about the inner workings of some of this stuff. As one of the most successful social scientists of my generation has said, he told me once, I was surprised, he said, I don't care what's under the hood, I just want to know how to drive the car. Now, I'm going to show you how to drive the car and fix it, because that's actually really important. But for now, in terms of the problem set, because we're thinking ahead to Thursday, right? It's Monday now. Play around with this and try to get comfortable feeling a little confused or feeling a little unsure, because that's going to happen. Even annoyed, I would have to say, because if you're someone like me, when I switched to R, I was quite annoyed. I just didn't know how to do things. But as long as you get to the point where you have the script and you're doing what I'm doing, which is you're highlighting, you're highlighting what you want to analyze, which by the way is going to be the stuff that's not in green, and you run it, then you should get the kinds of answers that you're looking for. So for example, based on this data set, the Titanic data set, what proportion of men survived the Titanic approximately? Well, here we have a two-way contingency table, and it doesn't look perfect, of course. This is not publication ready and has way too many decimal places, right? That's because it's just giving you information. It's not really trying to make things pretty. The figures, they're fairly pretty. But a proportion, we should know what a proportion is. That's from class. What I want to show here is that when you look at the tally function with two categories, you'll have a label here for one variable, and you'll have a label here for another variable. And why do we know this? Well, because we already looked at the variable labels. We also looked at the data set. That's why I strongly recommend you look at the data a little bit, or quite a bit, before you actually do some of these tabulations. Because it may be a little confusing as to whether this is actually a variable or whether this is a label or a variable. Or I could say, in the jargon of R, whether or not this is a factor variable with two levels of male and female, or another factor variable called survive with two levels. Now, how do I know this has two levels? Because there's a total right here, and the total adds up to 1. And the reason I know this actually is because of a subcommand right here, margins equals true. And we can talk about that later, but we're hitting close to 5. So I want to show you, I'll show you a little bit more syntax using the tally function as well. So let's go to question 5. Are social class and surviving the Titanic related to each other? Let's take a look. Well, how would we do this? You don't need to know statistics just to read output, right? You don't need to know R script. If you can do what we've done so far, you can answer these questions. This is like reading intelligently the newspaper. Well, how would you know it's related? Well, If you're in the upper class category, is there a smaller proportion of you who have survived? Well, let's see. Among the lower class, about 74%, so 0.74 of the lower class did not survive. If you're upper class, you still had a relatively high risk of not surviving, but it was only 0.36. So I think we can know the answer to that question. In the last minute, I want to emphasize these ones at the bottom with these outrageous zeros here. This is just precision and also consistency. It's kind of silly to look at, but remember, when you look at probabilities, all probabilities add up to 1. So what these tally functions are doing, and there are other ways to actually tabulate or tally categorical variables. What we're doing here is we're saying, okay, among those in the lower class, what proportion survived and what proportion did not, and what's the total? Well, the total will always be 1, because out of the lower class, there'll always be survivors and non-survivors. And why do we know that? Because survival is a factor variable that only takes on 2 categories. So there are no other categories that are missing in the data. It's a good data set. I would be worried if the total were less than 1, because it means that there are some categories that don't exist that we couldn't tabulate. So I encourage you to look at the syntax, review this, set up appointments for questions when it comes to installing R and RStudio, and then also the packages. Look out for this, a recording of this in a few minutes. And tomorrow, we have my next section, and I think that's from 6 to 7. I'm going to break down what exactly do these mean. And this is pretty fun, and it's pretty consistent. Which basically is, well, what are we doing with all these little things? These are like, I would sort of say, what we're doing here, the way to think about this in advance, is here we have a function, and this function consists, and a function is sort of like a story or a paragraph, and that paragraph consists of sentences, and separating each sentence is a comma. So basically, what we're doing here is, and this is a common structure. I'll just even type this out. I won't save this, but we have like function, what we are doing, separated by parentheses. Look, there's even an autocomplete for parentheses. And then here's maybe one thing, comma, another thing. And then typically we want to say data set we're using. I'm getting rid of punctuation here, because when you write code, you often want to be very specific about particular things. And then maybe it's something like options we want to add. So that's basically kind of the structure here. And each one of these little things is an argument. So here you have a function separated by parentheses, and we have different arguments. Now you can't write whatever you want. These arguments are very specific. Some are required, some are not. Some have defaults, some don't. So that's sort of the end of today. We basically covered some jargon related to a data frame. We opened RStudio. Well, let's start from the beginning. What do we do? We opened RStudio. We got into our folder a problem set that includes the data frame as well as the code. And we opened the data frame and explored it and looked at some of the elements of it and described, intuitively what those variables are. And we opened the code. I also showed you a problem of when you do not follow the protocol of opening a data frame, is that you can open up data sets that simply are built in. You don't want to do that. And I also explained to you a little bit of the jargon, like what is an R data file? That's good news, because that's the data. That's what we want to deal with, and also the script itself. And we got started a little bit on the analysis and in terms of interpreting what that analysis is. But there's a lot more to cover. Don't fret. We have plenty more of this semester to go through, and this will be posted online I'm going to turn, because we have a little bit of extra time, I know there's a section coming up. If you have questions, we can either go to my individual, well, if you have any questions, let me know. Right now, I'm going to end the recording right now.